Welcome everyone to the Ask Every Child webinar. So great to be with you here on a rainy afternoon on the East Coast. We're going to be talking today about the process of bearing witness to the students' lived experiences. And with me are my colleagues, Hadar Lubin, who is the Chief Medical Officer of the Miss Kendra programs, Erin Webb, who is the Director of Elementary Education at the Miss Kendra programs, and Alicia Stephen, who is the Director of Staff Development, who are joining us, all of us from the Miss Kendra program, and because we're going to be talking about something that is very much in our hearts in our program. So before I begin, though, just want to say if you have any questions that come to your mind during the presentation, feel free to type those into the Q&A box on your screen. And I'll be talking for a little bit. My colleagues will join us for a conversation, and then we'll have time to take your questions near the end of the webinar. So to be honest, the essence of the Miss Kendra program, which in some ways differentiates it from other programs in the trauma-informed and SEL kind of family of programs, is listening to children. It's a safe and structured time and place where we listen to children. And we know from much research that being with and the capacity to listen to children provides a buffering agent against the toxic stress of life for them. And that is what we've thought about it, though, as we've been working, we realized that listening is not quite the right term, and that really it's bearing witness to the students' lived experiences that captures a little bit more what we're about. And the reason for that is, if you think about the term bearing, it's another way of saying holding. Children need to be seen, they need to be heard, and they need to be held. And of course, for our own children, we can hold them as infants and small children. But for other people in our family, people we know, and our students, we hold them by holding their stories and holding what they tell us about their experience of the world. And I don't think we really fully appreciated the power of this. When we first began, we knew it was a good thing. We certainly felt that it was an important component of a trauma-informed approach. But, you know, is listening enough? I mean, is bearing witness enough given all the real problems that the kids are facing and that the toxic stress where it's coming from, poverty, racism, inadequacy, abuse, sometimes neglect, domestic violence, and the program does nothing directly to impact that. And certainly as a teacher in a school, you are very limited capacity to impact those things directly. So, however, I think that we've learned that in fact it does have a very significant impact. And I think one of the points of this webinar is to try to persuade you that it does have a tremendous impact. I certainly discovered this in my own life. During my teenage years, I experienced two traumas. One of which was my parents' alcoholism. Both of my parents were alcoholic. My father was a respected physician, doctor. And at 5 o'clock when he came home, my mother was preparing dinner, all was good. And by 7 p.m., they were both inebriated. And by 9 p.m., verbally abusive and sometimes physically violent. And this went on for a number of years. And when I was 18, I scooted out of there as quickly as I could, never to return. The other trauma was that when I was 19, I was almost murdered. I was a taxi cab driver and I was assaulted in a serious and intentional way to probably kill me. I still actually have the scar over my left eye to remind me of it from time to time. I was lucky I turned just at the right time to have the hammer, which hit me, hit the hardest part of my skull. And so I survived. The thing that has always been remarkable to me is that I returned to my job as a taxi cab driver 10 days after I was almost murdered. And when I left my home, I never returned. And for years, I was not that up till now. I'm 70 now. Um, the attempted murder does not bother me much. It doesn't come back to me. It has not haunted me. But my parents' alcoholism has continued to be troublesome for many years. It was helped a great deal in my late 30s when my father was forced into alcohol treatment when he was drinking too many martinis at lunch. Um, and that allowed me for the first time to talk about it with my brothers, who I'd never talked about it with it. And I've realized in all the work that I've done that there's a reason for the difference between these two traumatic events in my life. And the reason for that is that the attempted murder was very public. I went to the doctors, the hospital, the surgeons, ambulances, all the taxi people, my friends, family. I had to speak about it over and over again. They had to go find this guy. And I had a chance to really air out and explain to many caring people. I milked it for as long as I could, to be honest, but um, to talk about it. And with my parents' alcoholism, I never spoke a word to it to anyone. My father was a physician. What could I say? I couldn't go to school and talk about it, and I couldn't talk about it with them. And so uh, the impact of actually simply being able to share a traumatic experience can be extremely powerful, even without any effort to solve the problem that caused it. But the task of bearing witness is not easy. It is a burden for the listener and for the witness. And if you think about the amount of restraint it takes as someone who is witnessing another person's suffering and report or story. And in the middle of a teacher's day where you're running around, a teacher's job is to do. And it's to constantly be a million things happening. So to be able to stop in the middle of the day, even for a half an hour in a structured, this Kendra time, to listen is like jamming on the brakes of what you normally do to be able to receive. Bearing witness is really one of what we call the soft skills of teaching compared to the hard skills. Hard skills include, instructing, managing, organizing, structuring the children's day and thinking. Very critically important, the major part of what we do. But the soft skills include empathizing, listening, showing compassion, and bearing witness. And both are important to teaching. Unfortunately, stress and toxic stress in particular, over time hardens people. Whether you're a trauma victim or whether you have stress at work, over time we tend to harden because we must harden, because to be vulnerable is to open ourselves up to stress, anxiety, and suffering. And so over time, teachers do tend to emphasize the hard skills over the soft skills. So the Miss Kendra program is really an attempt to rebalance the soft and the hard skills of teaching, to build the teacher's flexibility and receptivity to the student, and to be able to allow the student the confidence to know that they can actually have a safe place to report what's going on and to get their worries off of their chest. Because we know, as we say in the program, that worries make it hard to learn. It creates the distraction, the worms inside that can, the distress inside of Pandora's box that is wiggling the kids' bodies and distracting their minds from learning. So we found that just having a time to remind the teacher to give a little time to bearing witness to the students' lived experiences improves the relationships between student and teacher, as well as the overall sense of purpose to teaching that brought many teachers into the profession to begin with. And so I think what you'll hear from my colleagues as well is something as simple as streamlined as not doing anything but listening can have widespread, powerful effects that we often minimize. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and let's get into it.
Yeah, David, I'm kind of sitting at the edge of my seat and trying not to jump into your sentence, but I think that, the whole notion that listening is a passive stand is somewhat deceptive, because we quite often think, okay, I'm just listening, which immediately evokes this sense of, do I have the skills? Do I know what to do? It's overwhelming. I'm helpless. I don't know what to do, because it calls on a stance of passivity. But if you say it's an active stance, then definitely it makes people anxious. Oh my God, people expect me to do something. And the trick of it, I think, it kind of paralyzes this very, what we're describing, an intuitive way of being present with another person. And the notion of bearing witness holds that kind of interpersonal and reciprocal stance that you are alluding to, which I think that every person who've ever listened to someone's narrative story or telling knows that this experience is highly dynamic, even if no action has occurred. And I think that the word bearing witness holds so much other meaning that is embedded in our humanity, is the ability to be present when somebody else is hurting or suffering, or sharing a good thing require presence. So I think that adding this extra dimension, rather than leaving it on the spectrum of passive versus active, that tends to neutralize things, brings really the depth of what it is to be witness to a testimony, to a tale of somebody else.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, Dr. Lubin, about what you said around active listening, that I'm not just listening with my ears, right? I'm also listening with my eyes, like I'm watching what's happening in the student's body as they're talking. I'm also using my own body in a lot of ways to reflect back to them what I am hearing. So if I'm hearing something that's upsetting, my response might be like, whoa, like, or oh my goodness, right? Like there's something that's happening in my body that also reflects back the oomph of what the person is saying. And I think sometimes we forget about our bodies, right? Like I think as adults too, like there's a sense that, and especially during this pandemic, being on a screen, we forget that we're an embodied person or an embodied presence. And I've never had more connection with students than when I'm sort of right there with them on their level, physically, like if they're first grade, I'm down here. And if they're fourth grade, I'm like a little bit, but just being right there with them physically and being able to kind of tune in and even mirror a little bit in my body some of what they're showing me, that also indicates not only am I listening to the content of what you're saying, but also my body is absorbing and picking up on the tone and the nuance of what you're saying and the impact that it's having on you.
Right. I mean, do you want to say something, Erin, about some of the challenges of actually what happens to you when you're bearing witness in terms of, what the,
yeah,
because I think some teachers worry that, I mean, a lot of teachers are very sensitive people who get upset when they hear that something is going on with their kids. And they're worried about if they do this too much, that it just is going to put more stress on them. And I think that's partly true, but do you want to say a little bit about that? Because
yeah, I mean, I think that some of the burden comes from that feeling of like static, like I can't do anything. And so I find that in my body, like if I'm just sitting and I'm not engaged actively in my body in like being with the students and being up with them or being down with them, being able to move my body through space and actually like engage with them in that way as a person, I find I find it doesn't burden me as much if I'm physically up and able to be up with them, than if I'm still, or if I'm, there's no movement in my response. So I'm even thinking about like my own body right now. Like it's easier for me to connect with people if I'm paying attention to how it's affecting me and I'm putting it back out. So if I'm able to say to the student, wow, that's really upsetting, and move in closer to them, then that connection lives between us. Versus if I'm not able to say anything, or I kind of back off, I think I'm more likely to take it home with me because I'm not expressing it out when I'm with them.
You're muted, Alicia.
I was going to say, as you're talking, Erin, about this movement piece, I'm thinking about this move of like leaning forward, literally, and hearing somebody's story, hearing a little kid's story, right? That's very different from the stance of like moving backwards. And I'm thinking about that too, in terms of the doing versus like just taking it in, right? There's like two different movements to that too. And I think as teachers, there's so much pressure for output. There's so much pressure for literally the lesson plan, the words that you have to say, the things that you have to put up in the classroom, the charts, the cards that you have to prepare. There's so much to do, and that your body is in motion in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And to listen, your body's motion needs to change. You need to pause, right? And you need to go like, whoa, what's happening with you? And I think that there's also an element of, as adults, we're always talking at kids and talking to kids and telling them about their experience and teaching them about violence and teaching them in the sense like we explain things to them, right? We say, this is right, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening. And we're we're teaching them words, we're teaching them spellings, we're like basically telling them about the world. And it's very rare for a kid to tell you about their world. But when we make space for it, it's so precious and so important. I think about the teachers that I had and that I loved, and it's the teachers who wanted to know a little bit about me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who like actually cared about my family or my life. It's not that I told them all my traumas and all the terrible things that happened as I was growing up. Sometimes I told them the wonderful things. Sometimes I alluded to the not so good things, but it's that moment when you pause, and instead of like outputting, when you're like receiving input from the child in front of you, there's a connection that happens. And I think that we all know how to do that. I think teachers come into the profession because they want to do that. They probably had teachers who did that for them, right? I mean, it's hard to like talk about teachers while there's probably people in the audience that I can't see, but I'm sure that you guys had people who did that for you. But it's hard to pause when you get into the motion of doing all the time, and the expectations are a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know, like I can ask this to you, Erin and David and Dr. Lubin, what are things that you do to pause, to switch the doing off and to like open yourself up for a story for a kid? What are the signs that you look for and go like, oh, maybe this is a moment that I should like get on my knees and like, go close to this kid's desk and say like, are you okay? What's happening? What are those things that we look for? What pauses us from that doing? I'm just curious what you all think.
I've done quite a bit of classroom observation over the last 10 years as we've been building, or 15 years over building the program. And I'm just saying things that are better known within the educational world. But, it's pretty easy to see a teacher who's struggling because they're more and more worried about maintaining control of the classroom. And so they're doing many things, and they're speaking more and more, and they're reminding people, and the whole thing the atmosphere in the classroom is, you feel it, the energy is high. And it comes probably initially from the students, but then the teacher tries to match it. And then the whole thing is this kind of distracting, and the teacher is this propelling things faster to get through the various things and to keep, some momentum going, as opposed to teachers that are doing a better job for whatever reason. There's a calmness in the classroom. You walk in, quite often the kids might be all doing some project, and there's quiet in the room, and the teacher has time to come by and sit next to each of the kids and talk to them. There's always the joke about the teacher's, eye in the back of her head, that she can see everything in the room. And so that there's a sense of the teacher is hovering, available, and taking in the classroom and can pick up on what's going on, not just disruptions, but needs of the kid. And, this is one of the problems, which is that successful teachers build a momentum that leads to things being easier. Whereas teachers who are struggling, it gets harder. And so they end up working hard. And I assume many of them leave the profession as a result, because it's just too exhausting. So in the Miss Kendra program, we solve the problem by structuring in the Miss Kendra time.
Mhm.
So there is a scheduled time. And I think that, it's like the morning meeting time is intended to provide a structured, expected time where the teacher is more in a receptive mode, can check in with kids. And then the other thing that's common is a story time, where the teacher is reading a story to the kids. And so the kids are, typically excited about that and are receptive. Though I've seen teachers who do that, and they tell the story and they go through and they show the picture book and they do the whole thing. But they don't leave much opening for the kids to, they're just little slivers of like, so what did you see this, kids? Or what do you think? Whatever, but it's just a little snippet, as opposed to other teachers who really allow the kids to begin to expand on their perceptions. The challenge is that if you let kids speak, things come out. So I think teachers sometimes feel nervous about what's going to come out of these kids, because it's a lot of fantasy sometimes it's made up, sometimes they're, it's God knows what it is. So there's a little bit of a tendency we don't want to give people, probably people in general, room to let us know what they're thinking. And so I think it becomes a challenge.
Yeah,
What other kind of techniques do people use? I don't know.
I would like to say something that maybe it would not be identified as a technique per se, but it's in the core of a successful exchange like that, which is I think that it's true for adult in general, particularly when an adult is having a particular role, like being a teacher or being a manager or what have you. And it's expected that if you have a role, you need to actually do something, and you need to give an advice. You need to solve problems. There is this kind of a task-oriented with a solution given. And part of what is, I believe, difficult for all adults, and today we kind of putting the zoom of it on the teachers juggling of those things, is to actually not be in a role that you're supposed to solve something, just to be the present who is actually attentively listen to the kid. And no matter what the kid says, short of alarming things that need to be followed with action, the actual being present at that moment is doing the most. And I think that we all have, adults, all of us who've been in relationship of any kind, been in a situation when you tell somebody about something that really upsets you or bugs you, or bad things happen at work, and you come into your either significant other, partner, roommate, whomever, and you tell them that, and they come up with a solution, what you should do, and you say, stop, stop, stop. I don't want you to solve the issue. I want you to hear me. And so, of course, I'm listening, but you should do X, Y, or Z. I said, no, I don't want the thing to do. I just want to know that somebody took a minute and heard me. And actually, when we do stop giving the advice and listen, we do much more than any good advice. Occasionally you need an advice, but that's really not what we are talking about. And I think that the kids know it better than us. I think the kids are not expecting us to solve those problems. They are just expecting us to see them, to hear them. And as you said very beautifully, David, and to hold them in a way that they carry in themselves. So it's not that you actually have to lift them up, but by being present, they are being lifted. And I think that that's something that is in our really human capacity. And we tend not to fall into it because it looks too simple. And you
Yes, but I
forget
mean, I
how to
think
do it.
the critical piece here is establishing a norm, where if you establish a norm within a classroom or a family even,
Right.
for that, the kids respond. I'm reminded of a case example that Danielle Grayson, who's up in Ontonagon, Michigan, who's on the call actually with us today.
Yeah.
Yes, hi, Danielle. Anyway, she told me basically, she's in this classroom, funky kids and the whole thing is going around anyway, but they're looking forward to the Miss Kendra time, and she just walks in and there's this quiet moment, this kind of a thing. And this kid in the back of the room just raises his hand and kind of lets loose, a very powerful story. And this is a kid who didn't say anything for months, and who just kind of got the drift of what the Miss Kendra program was supposed to do, with no intention of having anyone do anything, just simply the act of wanting to share, which is then built in. What we try to do in the program is to create a set of expectations of behavior, which is we sit, we listen, we have their prompts to prompt a question, then we listen to what people do, and then we show compassion. And I think that it's something to part of, Erin, you kind of alluded to this, part of your nonverbal body response is the way that you show compassion, which is that you're holding, you're accepting, and there's a compassionate response to the person of, I see you, there you are, and I'm here for you. It kind of reminds me of my grandmother who, there was the 50s and we didn't have much to do. So I just hung around, played at her feet. She would improvise stories occasionally. And I would sit in her lap or sit next to her, and she would talk and I would say stuff and she would listen to me. And that was just what we did for like an hour or two, like every day that she visited us. And that was what I expected, and nothing came of it other than this incredible bond that I formed with her.
Yeah, I want to pick up a couple of threads, because I know, Alicia, earlier you asked about which students I'm looking for, like which ones you're attending to. And I think that even further than that backwards is like, basically like, can I become available to notice? Like, right. So it's like, it doesn't matter. It's actually like all of the students need to be listened to. Right. And I can certainly like pick up on, like a little bit of fidgeting that maybe is like a distraction internally, or like I could pick up on a kid that has their head down and like totally disengaged, or like, a kid who makes like really intense eye contact where it's like, hey, like, what's up? I keep feeling like you're looking for me, right? Like, what are you looking for? Right. Or whatever it is. But like, actually, if I get out of the way, all these thoughts or things that I'm thinking about, or all of the tasks or things that I could be doing, and I just kind of show up with no agenda and go like, hey, like David's grandma, right? Like, it's just sort of like, I have no agenda. Can I then notice who actually needs a little bit of attention? And I think, we talk a lot in the education world around like attention seeking things. Like we label it as attention seeking behavior. And I always come back to this idea, well, like, children need attention, actually, like, and it's
Actually,
more about like what
not
kind of
just,
attention.
not just children.
Yeah, we all need attention, and maybe we need attention because we need somebody to help tie our shoe, or maybe we need attention because we're worried about, somebody's sick at home or somebody's
Just
upset or hurt.
look at Facebook. Yeah. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Right. And like so much of that, like social media scrolling distraction is this level of like searching for some kind of like validation or response. And children, all of us are programmed to be looking for a certain kind of like response or mirroring or connection. And we need that. And so part of it is like, can I become available to actually notice the students that you're thinking about, Alicia, like, the ones that we're worried about?
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of highlight in Erin in what you're bringing and David, what you mentioned before, which is a norm setting is that it's become part of the daily, weekly norm and culture of the school, prevents those kind of eruptions that are not to be missed by anybody when the kid is so filled up and then explodes. No teacher and no person will miss it. But if you create a norm that every day there will be some just regular worries that you didn't get what Santa will bring you to, I'm very worried about my grandma, and having this kind of a norm that you talk about those things on a regular basis, which the Miss Kendra program creates a platform for it, really prevent the need to identify the students because they all are covered, and those who need to talk would know there is a norm to share, and that will be a turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it kind of also, speaks to that thing about that pressure that teachers have around like delivery and schedules and needing to do the task. And depending on which school, because we've been in so many different schools, we've seen such a range of how, administrators expect teacher, like, but to do things by the minute. Right. And so like I think that there's a lot of pressure to kind of follow that. And I think that especially in a system like that, like scheduling it in is so helpful, because then everybody knows at this time we get heard, especially the kids. They're like, yes, like I'm feeling really, really bad right now, but I can save it until like 11 a.m. because then I can talk about it because somebody will pay attention 100%. And I think that that's really, it feels maybe artificial and not organic, but it's like really helpful. I mean, school is not always organic. It's like pretty scheduled. So
No, but school is like one of the last remaining social organizational systems left holding things together,
sure.
And I was just wondering actually I mean, I don't want to, it's kind of been said, but with the change in the way that our family structures are, with usually both parents working during the day and very active and sometimes working two jobs, and with the internet and the black screen of our iPhones and social media being the witness to us. So, in other words,
Yeah.
instead of being playing in an afternoon on the carpet, with your parents reading the newspaper, or just, going for a family walk, or all those things that hopefully people still do, but not doing it as much because the world is so fast, so many things going on that children are not getting enough of this kind of just simple, quiet, bearing witness. And they're bringing that need more into the schools, which is one of the reasons that we're having problems in the schools in the last, it's descending over the last 30 years of just the pressure of these kids coming in with a much higher need for this, which may be one of the things that is spurring the SDL and trauma-informed movement in the schools to address this rising need. I don't know. Well, listen, it's 4:37, so Jillian, who's from Big Voice, our webmaster, is going to pull out a couple of questions from the audience and pitch it to the panel.
Okay, so the first question is, what if I listen and the students get upset, or the student gets upset? What do I do now?
Great question.
I guess, I mean, this was something that was on my mind, and I guess I'll kind of address it and then like have you guys also talk about it. But I think that there's there's something that we're socialized with as adults to have expectations from children to always be happy. And that's a very like adultist thing that we have in our world. And we kind of like want to maintain that. And when there's a little bit of upset, it's like immediately, don't cry, forget about it, leave it, you know. We're so anxious to make children pure and good and happy. But the thing is, a 2-year-old might lose their grandmother. A 4-year-old might have mom and dad yelling and screaming and fighting, right? And so like stress and trauma touches us at all ages, not just when we're adults. And so I think like it's important for children to be seen as whole, to be, you know, we talk a lot about the whole child, the whole truth, the whole school. And I think that children need to be seen in all of the delight and joy that they give us and bring us and share with us, but also they're sad and scared and angry. And it's okay for them to be those things. It's not, you know, like they're gonna be happy for a few minutes, they're gonna be angry for a few minutes. We talk about it and feelings come and go, you know, stress comes and goes. But I think that when we don't address it, it builds up and becomes worse. And it kind of then has a life of its own. And sometimes it's too late, you know, like then you have like full-blown anxiety or PTSD. And
Yeah, I'm sorry, Alicia.
Go ahead. Go
Yep.
ahead.
I just wanted to kind of, I know that among the members, the participants today, there are definitely several parents there, mothers, of
Yeah.
families, right? And those of us who raised kids or babysit kids who were pre-verbal, and kids cry and get upset. And what do we do as parents? Say, are you hungry? Are you cold? Are you tired? Is it time for a nap? Shall I sing you a song? Okay. What it means is that we don't know exactly, we know that they're upset, we're not sure what it is, but there is not true sense of the world is going to fall apart. You're just not sure if the diaper is wet, or is it a noodle battle, or shall I just rock them more? But when a kid in the school, after they say something and they get upset, the same kind of inquiry is appropriate. You crying, what, why are you crying? What are you sad? Maybe the kid is crying because, you know, eventually somebody actually asked the question and they are just overwhelmed with a sense of emotions. And there's nothing bad about it. And if that is the case, you say, I'm glad I'm here for you. If the kid is said, I'm now afraid, you comfort. I mean, there are all the things that we tend to be somewhat comfortable with the ambiguity. When it comes to the kids at school, it seems like we need to assume if a child is crying, something is bad is going to happen and the Pandora's box is about to explode.
Right, and but that attends again to the what kind of a norm you set up, which picks up on what Alicia was saying. If the norm is we expect everyone to behave,
Yeah,
and we want everyone to be a good student and behave, and if you really get upset or whatever, if you cry, we'll send you to the social worker. If you get angry, we'll send you to the principal's office. If the norm is that no one should be upset here, then you've created an environment that will not be welcoming and will problematize it when you ask a kid and they start to cry. Because then you haven't set up a norm that includes that. So the good thing about the Miss Kendra program is that we set up a norm that everyone has worries. and we have a module on what is a worry. And we point out that you can have no worries, some worries, or a lot of worries, and worries make it hard to learn. If you have that as a mantra, that there are worries, and you can say, you model it, I have worries, and our job is to hold the worries and do our job. My job, I have worries as a teacher, but I do my job. And you have worries as students, and we're asking you to do a job, which is to learn. But once in a while, those worries come out. And when they come out, maybe some tears come out from me, from you. And that's what's happening. And it means that here's a chance for you to get rid of that worry, to lower, to empty your cup, as we say, to empty your cup to be able to have more worries. Otherwise, if you're holding all these worries, the water in the cup just goes up and up and up, and then comes out your eyes as water. It's the
If
water.
anybody's interested, you should ask us about the cup activity that we
Oh,
do.
no, I did it
Kids
today.
talk about worries.
No, that's
I
exactly
did it
right.
today, guys. No, it's really good. It's like, you pour in a little bit and then someone says, I have a worry about my parents. And you go, okay, you pour in a little bit and then you keep pouring it until not only is it like this full, it's like all the way to the top. And then you say, what's going to happen when we pour in more worries? And they're like, no, don't do it. And then the water goes all over. But this is normal. This is a normal thing,
Sometimes
So
life
if
gives
you
you a
can
full
set
cup
up that,
of worries.
that,
Yeah.
if you can set up that it's okay to have that kind of a thing, then when a child does cry, you can say, well, it seems like you have a lot of worries today. And you can have the other kids can go, yeah, and they can show compassion. A moment when a child is upset is an opportunity for showing compassion, which is what we want people to be able to do, not only to report their worries, but to learn how to show compassion. And as I don't think I need to remind us all, this world is short on people's compassion skills for each other. And so that we need to build citizens that know how to show compassion.
I just
And,
want to say, as we're talking about this, that it's important that there's work that's happening in the world where there's no active pouring of stress into people's cups, right? There are activists, there are people in the world who are trying to change the problems that we have. There are, doctors who are working on change, stopping the illnesses that we have, right? Those things are actively happening. And I think sometimes we get overwhelmed. We feel like if a kid shares a worry that we have to become the person who solves the problem, the doctor who's solving the illness, right? There's all these roles. And I think it's important that people are doing that and having a moment to just be listened to and having that this moment is not about me fixing it. This moment is about bearing witness. I feel is really, it's important. And I think that we need both. And and it's wonderful. The people who are doing the other things, right?
thank you, Alicia.
yeah.
I think another, we need one more question. We have room for a couple more questions from the audience. Jillian?
If I'm giving kids positive attention when they're acting out, aren't I reinforcing their acting out behavior?
Great question. It's actually a statement. But
I mean, the question is, if you give attention to a kid who is acting out, is that going to reinforce their acting out?
Yes.
That was the question.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's why actually not assuming that we understand what the acting out is essential. If a child is acting out because they just want to disrupt the class and the teacher is giving a lot of positive attention, indeed, that will be positive reinforcement to a behavior you don't want in the class. But we're not mind readers. It's the final expression is the acting out. So asking the kid whatever is that, what's happening, why you behaving in this way, or did something happen that is upsetting to you, gives the child the chance to actually respond to it, or give you, the teacher, an insight as to what the acting out is about. Then you are more likely to have a positive reinforcement for actually sharing and for letting an adult know about their worries. So I think that we don't need to interpret an acting out behavior with the assumption that we understand what it represents. And therefore asking, and again, if there is a norm that when somebody's behaving a certain way that is disruptive, that we pause and ask, what are you worried about? What happened? Why are you doing it? It actually probably not only will allow the child to describe what really bothering him or her, but it also probably eventually will reduce the acting out in the first place, because
Well, I
there's a
mean,
form of exchange. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that this is what happens when you don't have a norm in your classroom to hear people's worries. They act out. And then you ask them after they've acted out about their feelings, but that's too late. A kid who's acting out should have been asked about their worry yesterday or the hour before. So yeah, I agree with what Dr. Lubin said around, there is a possibility if you wait till they act out and then give them the attention of bearing witness, you do run the risk of reinforcing them. The purpose of having a morning meeting check-in or Miss Kendra time, throughout the week, or if you use the worry board that we use in the program to check in, you're going to catch them when they're not acting out and they're simply verbally capable of communicating their worry. We're trying to have them communicate their worries verbally in language, rather than indirectly through acting out behavior. That is how kids are communicating their worries, by acting out behaviors. So if you create that situation where you're ahead of the game, you'll be acting, it's like striking when the iron is cold. You talk to kids and before they're acting out about their worries, then they won't heat up. So I think it's all about timing. And I think there are times that if you do perceive that there is a child taking advantage of it, seeking attention in a repetitive way, in a manipulative way, and kids can be manipulative, they can make stuff up, they can do that. If it's your assessment, then you can kind of maybe forego it for them in that moment. I think we want to emphasize it's about creating a culture, a norm in your classroom that supports it and that supports those norms rather than reacting constantly to the emergency.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Okay. How do I handle a situation where a student shares something very personal and troubling with the entire class during Miss Kendra time?
Okay.
So I've had a lot of people express worries about what if a student shares something and then it becomes public, then we lose access to the privacy of that. Like, so it's like there's a lot of fear that like things need to be private, or that other students can't handle hearing about these bad things, or that that classrooms can't become places where children are compassionate. And I think this goes back to what we've been saying the whole time, which is that if you are building in and showing and demonstrating and giving examples and practicing showing compassion, students are much less likely to have these kind of like negative aftermath kind of moments after another student has shared something. There's always this fear that like there's going to become gossiping or bullying, but actually when something real and true is being shared in Miss Kendra time or at any time in a public way, the majority of the class actually recognizes that. It's sort of like we talk about it as like it has a ring of truth to it. So when a student is sharing something deeply personal, for the most part, it is an innate thing that we all kind of pause and go like, whoa, oh my gosh, that's so upsetting. Are you okay? Right. And so actually the majority of the time that is what's happening. And actually by asking students, so like, Daniel, do you have a thought about what your friend just said? And like, Daniel might say like, that's really sad. Are you sad? And then, Jonathan goes, yeah, I'm sad. And then the whole class goes, I'm sad too. Like there's this feeling of like, okay, right? Because we understand that actually sad things happen and it could happen to any of us actually. And so actually, I might say to Daniel, do you want to give Jonathan a red bead for sharing that? And so rather than having Daniel like make fun of him, there's actually this moment of like connection where he gets it. He gets that what was shared was important. And I think, where you're less likely to be successful is when you haven't been able to set the norm early, that we do care about what each other is going through and we do care about what other people are saying. So it's much harder to kind of turn things around in the classroom where it feels already very toxic or very aggressive towards each other, or there isn't space. It does take a lot of work to like reset that norm once that norm has been set, that actually kids don't care about each other, and that they don't, that there's a lot of like meanness happening.
That's well said. Annie Morris, who's the mental health consultant to Sally B. Howard School in Wilson, North Carolina, is also on our webinar right now. And Aaron and I were both there recently. And I talked to her just last week, and she's doing something that really helps schools when they first start the program address this issue, which is she sets out a reminder every week about what lesson things are on, and makes herself available. And then also teachers who are having trouble with a certain letter or a certain issue can immediately contact her, and she can even like help write the letter or whatever. So there's a feeling of somebody who's on it, standing behind the teacher, if one of those issues come up and you feel that something very private or sensitive has come up, to give back up to that teacher. And what I think, I think what Annie communicated is it's really providing that sense of reassurance to the teachers, because in fact, her teachers at Sally B. Howard are quite capable of handling it. But there is a feeling of like, as this gets going, will there be backup? Do I have someone I can talk to about it? And, just like if it's like that cup, you pour the cup from one cup to another cup into the teacher's cup, you got to take the teacher's cup, got to pour that into Annie's cup, and then Annie's got to pour the cup. We got to keep moving it along, so that no one person's cup is overfilled.
Yeah, I love that. And that's so true.
We had time for one. Oh, go ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, one more thought about that too. Like, I know that there are a ton of amazing like teachers, assistants, and volunteers and other people. And I think they get this too. I've seen some people like really step up in these moments when like teachers totally full, and then it's like, okay, let me talk to this kid, or let me do this thing. And I think that it just like highlights how, a really healthy, functional school system, there's like somebody you can go like, hey, I'm full, like I need somebody here. And, and any human who's like, there to do that, like can really demonstrate the capacity to be present and be helpful. You don't have to be a specialist to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, I'm thinking about the rain outside, which is that, it rains maybe 4 inches. And the thing is, what's 4 inches? It's 4 inches is okay if it's equally spread out.
Mhm.
But what happens with the hills and the valleys of our land is the water collects into
Mm.
certain areas where it floods, because all the water that came down, the same amount everywhere, gets concentrated in one space or another. And unfortunately, traumatized kids, people in poverty, people of color, all sorts of individual people, for whatever reason, are sometimes these valleys that absorb other people's rainfall, and
Mm.
then they become flooded, and then they can become dysfunctional, or they become killers. You think about this in terms of who goes crazy with gun violence. The goal is to spread it out and disseminate it, so we are all holding the stress of life more equally, and so we can all bear it together, rather than putting it on to certain people who then collapse or explode. And so I think that that's one of the functions of sharing your story, is you spread that pain and suffering out to those other 30 people in the room, or in our case here, to the people in the webinar. Um, anyway, so that finishes it up for today. I want to thank Alicia and Aaron and Adar for joining me, and all of you for joining us. We want to invite you to a special screening of the movie Resilience, which we're going to have here in our next webinar, the full movie, followed by a half-an-hour discussion with myself, Dr. Lubin, and Kat Davis, who is the therapist in the movie, on November 30th at 4 p.m., same time on Tuesday after Thanksgiving. You're welcome to join and to see the movie if you haven't seen it before, and then we will sit there and discuss the movie. And we want to thank you all for doing that. We have a summary and a tip sheet for all of the points that we made today that is available to you, as well as the recording of the webinar. So thank you all so much for coming. See you on the 30th of November. Have a wonderful holiday, and take care.